This is a work of fiction inspired by historical accounts and does not promote or glorify illegal activities. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories or superstitions. I've always been the rational type, the one who explains strange noises with logic, who laughs at supernatural stories around the campfire. That was until I started working as a night watchman at the old Monteiro Building in the city center. I took the job out of necessity. I'm a 28-year-old civil engineering student who needed a job that would allow me to study during the day. The shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week, and the pay was decent for what seemed like a simple job. Just me, an empty building, and time to read my technical books while making periodic rounds. The Monteiro Building was a commercial complex built in the 1950s. 6 floors of offices, all of which had been vacant for almost a year due to a renovation that had never been completed. The building was located in the oldest part of the city, surrounded by other buildings that were equally aged. During the day, it looked like just another commercial building, with its yellowed concrete facade and windows that needed a good cleaning. At night, however, when the lights of the other establishments were turned off, the building seemed to take on a different aura. On my first night, Carlos, the daytime security guard, gave me a quick tour of the place. The lobby had a high ceiling, with an antique chandelier that swayed slightly in the wind that came through the cracks in the windows. The reception desk was covered with protective plastic. 2 elevators were to the right, one working, the other blocked off with yellow tape. "That elevator on the right has been broken for months," explained Carlos, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a tired posture. "Just use the one on the left or the stairs." Carlos showed me the security room on the ground floor, equipped with old camera monitors, a mini bar, a worn sofa, and a table with a logbook. "You need to do a full round every 2 hours. Note anything out of the ordinary in the logbook. If you hear anything strange, it's probably just the pipes or the wind. This place creaks like an old ship." I nodded, mentally noting everything he said. It seemed simple. "Oh, and one more thing," Carlos added before he left. "It's best to use a flashlight when patrolling, even if the emergency lights are working. The wiring is old and sometimes fails." With that, he handed me a set of worn keys and a heavy flashlight. "Good luck, kid." The first 2 nights were quiet, almost boring. I made my rounds, studied a little, napped on the couch when sleep was nagging, and then went back to making my rounds. The building was silent except for the occasional rattle of pipes or creaking of structures. Nothing that bothered me. It was on the 3rd night that things began to change. I was making my second round around 1 a.m. I had already checked the ground floor and the first floor, and now I was heading up to the second. The stairs were concrete with metal handrails, and each step produced an echo that reverberated through the central space. As I reached the second floor, I noticed that one of the emergency lights was flickering, casting irregular shadows across the hallway. The second floor had been an accounting firm, from what Carlos had told me. Several cubicles of offices divided the space, creating little mazes. There was something about this floor that had made me uncomfortable since the first night. Maybe it was the denser silence or the more pronounced, musty smell. I walked down the main hallway, shining my flashlight into the darkest corners. That's when I heard it. A soft click, like a door closing. I stopped, shining my flashlight in the direction of the sound. Nothing. I kept walking, slower now. I came to an area that looked like it had once been a conference room. Furniture covered in dusty sheets looked like ghostly figures in the dim light. I quickly inspected it and was about to leave when I heard it again. This time the sound of footsteps, light and quick, as if someone were running barefoot across the floor. "Is anyone there?" I called, my voice sounding more uncertain than I would have liked. Silence. I decided to check every room on the floor. One by one, I opened the doors, shined the lights in the corners, looked for any sign of intruders. Nothing. As I finished my inspection, I convinced myself that it had just been my imagination fueled by the oppressive silence of the place. When I finally finished my rounds and returned to the security room, I made a quick note in the logbook. Strange noises on the second floor. Checked. Nothing found. The rest of the night passed without incident, and by the time the sun began to rise, I had rationalized it all off as just the normal noises of an old building. I handed over the job to Carlos with a simple, peaceful night, without mentioning the episode. If you've ever felt that inexplicable feeling of being watched in an empty room, share your experience in the comments. Have you ever experienced something that you couldn't rationally explain? The fourth night began like the previous ones. I arrived promptly at 10 p.m. Carlos gave me a report on the day, nothing new, and left. I organized my study books on the table, made some coffee, and settled in for the long night. Around midnight, I started my first round. Everything was normal on the ground floor. I went up to the first floor, and everything was normal too. When I reached the second floor, I felt a chill run down my spine. The light that had been flickering the night before was now completely off, leaving the entire hallway in darkness. I aimed my flashlight and moved forward, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. The silence seemed deeper, almost palpable. The air was heavy, with a sweet smell I hadn't noticed before. As I walked down the main hallway, I had the unmistakable feeling that I was being watched. I turned quickly, lighting the path back the way I had come. Nothing. I continued my rounds, trying to be as thorough as possible. It was when I arrived at that same conference room that I noticed something different. One of the sheets covering the furniture seemed to have been moved. I was sure that the night before it had been completely covering what appeared to be a conference table, but now it was partially pulled to the side. I walked over to investigate and noticed marks on the dusty floor. They looked like small footprints, as if a child had walked there. Impossible, I muttered to myself. The building was empty, and there was no way a child could have entered without being noticed. I decided to quickly finish my rounds on the upper floors and go back to check the security cameras. I went up to the third floor, where there were more offices. Nothing out of the ordinary. The fourth floor was similar. When I got to the fifth floor, where a law firm had been located, I noticed that the temperature seemed to have dropped a few degrees. My breath formed small clouds in the air. In April, even at night, the temperature didn't usually drop that much. Strangely, only this floor was freezing. I quickened my pace, wanting to get it over with. I was halfway down the main hallway when all the doors to the adjacent rooms slammed shut simultaneously. The noise was so sudden and loud that I nearly dropped my flashlight. "Who's there?" I shouted, my heart pounding. No answer. Only silence returned, even more oppressive. I checked each room, my nerves on edge. They were all empty. There was no way all the doors could have closed on their own unless a very strong draft had blown through. But there were no open windows, and the air conditioning had been off for months. I finished my rounds on the sixth floor, which was just a large open space with a few partitions. Nothing strange there except for the same feeling of being watched that had been with me since the beginning of the night. Back in the security room, I checked the cameras. The system was old, with poor quality black and white footage. I reviewed the footage from the second floor while I was on the fifth floor and saw nothing unusual. The cameras on the fifth floor, however, showed only static at the exact moment the doors closed. I made a detailed note in the incident log, describing everything that had happened. I was beginning to think that perhaps there was an electrical problem in the building, causing both the temperature drops and the problems with the doors and cameras. The next few hours I spent restless, unable to concentrate on my studies. Every little noise would startle me. When Carlos finally arrived to relieve me, I was exhausted. "What's up, kid?" "You look like you saw a ghost," he joked. I told him about the events of the night. He listened attentively without interrupting me. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds. Look, this building is old. Electrical problems, drafts, all that's normal, he said finally. But, he hesitated, if you still feel anything strange, let me know. There was something in the way he said it that made me think Carlos knew more than he was saying, but I was too tired to insist. I went home, slept for a few hours, and forced myself to believe that everything had rational explanations. The fifth night began with heavy rain. The storm battered the windows of the building, and lightning occasionally illuminated the lobby through the large windows of the entrance. The sound of the rain, at least, lessened the feeling of oppressive silence. At 11 p.m., while I was reviewing some structural calculation exercises, the lights in the security room flickered several times before going out completely. The power was out. Shit, I muttered, reaching for my flashlight. According to protocol, I was supposed to check the generator underground to see if it had started up. Reluctantly, I grabbed the flashlight and left the security room. The lobby was completely dark except for the moments when lightning briefly illuminated it. I headed for the door that led to the basement stairs on the other side of the lobby. The stairs to the basement were narrow and steep. The air grew thicker with each step I took. The basement was used as a storage room and also housed the generator room. I had never liked the place, the low ceilings, the dampness, the smell of mold and oil, but tonight it felt especially unwelcoming. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, I shined my flashlight down the hallway ahead. The dim light barely penetrated the dense darkness. I walked forward, trying to get my bearings. Large boxes and old furniture formed a maze in the wide space. I found the generator room after a few minutes. I tried to turn it on, following the instructions left on a laminated piece of paper on the wall, but it didn't even sputter. Completely dead. Resigned, I picked up the radio to inform the security company about the power failure. Just static. No signal underground. That's when I heard it. A sound of childish laughter, low but distinct, coming from somewhere in the warehouse. I froze in place. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. The laughter came again, this time closer. I pointed my flashlight in the direction but saw no one. "This isn't funny," I yelled, trying to sound firm despite my growing fear. "Show yourself now." Silence. I started walking towards the exit, moving as fast as I could between the obstacles. I was halfway up the stairs when my flashlight started to fail, blinking frantically. "No, no, no," I whispered, slapping her with the palm of my hand. The light went out completely. I was plunged into absolute darkness, the kind that seems to press against your eyes. I tried to orient myself, remembering the way to the stairs. I moved forward slowly, hands outstretched in front of me, touching boxes and furniture to guide me. That's when I felt it. Something touched my shoulder. A small, cold hand. I screamed and ran blindly, knocking over objects, knocking things over, desperate to find the stairs. Miraculously, my flashlight came back on, blinking faintly. I located the stairs and took them two at a time. By the time I reached the lobby, I was panting and sweating despite the cold. I tried to calm myself, to rationalize. Maybe it was just my imagination, amplified by the darkness and the silence. Or maybe there really was someone down there, an intruder, a street kid seeking shelter from the storm. With my hands still shaking, I decided to check the rest of the building. If there was an intruder, I needed to locate him. This time, I would take the elevator up instead of the stairs. I didn't want to be in confined, dark spaces again. I pressed the button for the working elevator, hoping the emergency generator would at least keep the basic systems running. To my surprise, the elevator responded, its doors opening with a metallic groan. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the second floor. The doors closed, and the elevator began to slowly ascend. The seconds dragged by as I watched the numbers above the door change. Ground floor, first floor, second floor. The elevator didn't stop. It kept going up. Third floor, fourth floor, fifth floor. I pressed the stop button repeatedly, but nothing happened. The elevator passed the 6th floor and continued upward. 7th floor. My heart skipped a beat. The building was only 6 stories high. The elevator stopped with a jolt, and the doors opened. Before me was not a hallway, but a wall of old brick. I blinked in confusion. How was this possible? Before I could react, the elevator lights went out and my flashlight failed again. I was in total darkness again. The elevator began to shake as if something heavy was bouncing around inside it. I pressed the buttons frantically, praying for the doors to close. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally began to move. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the space between the closing doors, and for an instant, just an instant, I saw the outline of a small figure standing in the gap, its eyes glowing in the darkness. The elevator descended rapidly, swaying dangerously. When the doors opened again, I was back on the ground floor. I stumbled out, breathing fast, heart pounding like a drum. The lights in the lobby flickered on and off. The power had come back on. I walked shakily back to the security office and immediately called my supervisor. I told him what had happened, trying to keep my voice steady. He said he would send someone to cover for me and check the building, but that it would be at least 2 hours before anyone arrived due to the storm. During the wait, I didn't leave the security room. I sat there watching the camera monitors. At one point, the camera on the 5th floor showed a small figure quickly crossing the hallway. I froze the image and zoomed in, but the quality was so poor that all I could make out was what looked like a child of about 8 years old. I checked the cameras on the other floors. Nothing on the 6th, nothing on the 4th, nothing on the 3rd, until I saw the figure again, this time on the 2nd floor, standing at the end of the hallway, looking directly at the camera. My cell phone rang, startling me. It was the supervisor informing me that my replacement would be arriving in 15 minutes. When I looked back at the monitor, the figure had disappeared. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. 15 minutes. I could handle it. That's when I heard knocking on the security room door. 3 slow knocks, as if someone was using only one finger. I glanced at the monitors. The downstairs hallway where the security room was located appeared empty. The knocking came again. Louder this time. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice cracking. Silence. Then a childish laugh, the same one he had heard in the basement. Now it was on the other side of the door. "What do you want?" I screamed, fear giving way to anger. "What the hell do you want from me?" The answer came in a soft, childish, drawling voice. "I want to play with you." Something was scratching at the door now, as if tiny nails were trying to dig into the wood. I looked back at the monitors. The hallway camera still showed that no one was there. But the scratching continued, getting louder. I pushed the table against the door and backed into the far corner of the room. I glanced at the clock. 10 minutes until the replacement arrived. I could handle it. The scratching stopped. A tense silence fell, and then, "Won't you let me in?" The voice now sounded as if it was coming from several directions at once. "Or would you rather I take you to play on the 7th floor?" I felt my blood run cold. I turned to the camera monitors and saw something that made me gasp in horror. On every screen, on every floor, the same childlike figure stood in the center of the hallway, all looking directly into the cameras, all perfectly still. The radio on the table hissed, and the same childish voice came through the speakers. "Are you afraid of the dark?" The lights in the room began to flicker. "Let's find out." And then total darkness. Even the monitors went dark. For a few moments I stood still, barely breathing. Then I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck and small, icy fingers touching my shoulder. "I found you." Scared? Don't miss more stories like this. Subscribe to our channel and receive horror videos and accounts. Just click to subscribe. I was found the next morning by Carlos, huddled in the corner of the security room, in shock. My replacement never arrived. Apparently, the storm had blocked several streets, and he was unable to access the building. Carlos told me that he found me mumbling repeatedly about the seventh floor and the child. I was taken to the hospital, where I spent 2 days under observation. A week later, when I had recovered enough to talk about what had happened, I sought out Carlos. I wanted answers. He hesitated for a long time, but finally told me. In the 1970s, there was a fire in the Monteiro Building. The seventh floor, which housed a small kindergarten, was completely destroyed. 5 children died, including an 8-year-old girl named Cecília, the daughter of the caretaker. After the fire, the building was rebuilt, but with only 6 floors. The 7th floor was completely removed, as if it had never existed. "They say she still looks for friends to play with," Carlos murmured, "especially in the dark." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, feeling a mixture of fear and anger. Carlos shrugged. "Nobody believes it until they see it for themselves, and not everyone does." I never went back to the Monteiro Building, but to this day I feel as if small, cold fingers occasionally touch my shoulder when I'm alone in the dark. And sometimes, in my nightmares, I still hear that childish voice asking, "Are you afraid of the dark? Let's find out."